28-30 July, 1942, Turtle Bay Espiritu Santo New Hebrides. The midnight air is heavy with moisture, the jungle steamy where bulldozers have clawed a path through it. A CB grader pushes forward its blade, slicing through coral like bone. Floodlights carve a jagged line of white across the dark silhouettes of trees. The strip is just a ribbon of crushed reef, barely more than a promise, but the clock is ticking. Men from the 1st Naval Construction Battalion move in rhythm. A choreography born from days of labor, not months, dump spread, compact test. A truck sputters, then stalls. Another pushes it out of the way without missing a beat. The roller passes again and again, the sound of its wheels resonating in the humid night. A lantern tips and hands smother the flame, but work never stops. In the distance, the surf crashes, marking time. To the south, Vice Admiral Robert Gormley's South Pacific Command needs this airstrip now. To the north, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's 8th Fleet waits at Rabaul, with Vice Admiral Nishizo Tsukahara's air groups prowling the sea lanes. Radios crackle with coordinates and weather reports. No one wastes words. The order is clear: build a 6,000-foot runway in 20 days and alter the map. Dawn spills over the canopy. The first test pass begins. Wheels hiss over the coral, dust rises and engines hum steady. Ground crews motion measure nod in silent coordination. Another pass. Another. The line stretches 2,000 feet, then more. Graded edges are marked with oil drums and freshly felled trees. A dozer hits a stubborn root. 2 more arrive, lift, and the root is extracted like a tooth. By afternoon, the strip looks improbable yet real, a pale ribbon cutting through the green jungle. A signal panel flashes, engines roar. A bomber approaches its wheels, skimming the airstrip's edge, testing the new surface. Touchdown tires kiss the ground, hold firm. The airframe shakes but stays true. Brakes whisper as propellers wind down into the heavy heat. The CB's smile wave the pilot forward. No ribbon, no ceremony, just work. A second aircraft circles, then a third. Fuel drums are pushed by hand. A radio shack made of crates and tin records the time. Someone chalks 6000 on a board, underlining it twice. Men drink warm water, then return to shovels, rakes, tampers. The strip must grow before the sun sets. Beyond the reef, the sea is still a mirror of possibility. In the trees, a generator hums to life. The grader's blade drops again. The white line moves forward. Cut to silence. The calendar is July 1942, and Espiritu Santo is suddenly the hinge of a campaign that does not yet have a beachhead. On 8 July, a CB detachment lands with a 20-day order: cut a 6,000-foot runway through jungle, lay coral, make it hold weight. The purpose is not abstract. Guadalcanal is a week away on the calendar, and the only way to put bombers and fighters over the approaches is to create an airfield where none exists. If they deliver on time, heavy aircraft stage forward escorts, stretch their radius, reconnaissance flies daily, and the convoy timetable for the 7 August landings stops being theory. If they slip transports and escorts creep north under a sky, the enemy can contest, and every delay multiplies risk across hundreds of miles of water. 2 command philosophies face each other across the map. In the south, Vice Admiral Robert L. Gormley runs a theatre that must turn logistics into tempo. The American answer is procedural. Break the problem into steps, clear grade, lay, compact proof, operate, and run those steps 24 hours a day. Operators keep dozers moving on cannibalized parts. Air defense crews memorize the skyline and prepare to hide their muzzle flashes, and flyers are told to trust a surface that did not exist last week. In the north, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa commands the 8th Fleet at Rabaul, with Vice Admiral Nishizo Tsukahara's 11th Air Fleet overhead. Their answer is depth and reach bombers flying boats and submarines to scout, harass, and punish any forward base that shows light. They do not need to seize Santo. They need to make work stop an air alarm here, a crater there, enough to push completion past the invasion window. The change that matters is doctrinal. Before this summer, the default was ships, protect ships. Now the weight shifts to forward airfields, protect fleets and landings. A single fighter strip within range of the Solomons compresses the map. It lets escorts range farther, and lets bombers stage with shorter legs and heavier loads. The Seabees are not simply moving dirt. They are moving the effective front line north by 6,000 feet of crushed reef. That strip also embodies an industrial idea exported to the tropics: standardize tasks, standardize materials, and make speed a product of organization rather than heroics. Coral becomes pavement because trucks, graders, rollers, and test crews cycle without pause, not because one machine performs a miracle. The clock writes its own pressure points. Day 3, the tree line still presses close, and the monsoon breathes on the surface. Drainage cuts must be opened, or the first squall will liquefy the work. Day 8, compaction crews argue over density and rebound. If they settle for good enough, the first heavy landing will rut the center line and erase days. Day 14, the air threat tightens. Sunrise and late afternoon become the hard hours when Rabol's searchers are most likely to appear. Security orders multiply: blackout, discipline, revetment, placement, dispersal of fuel drums, and each eats minutes from the production line. Yet the line must hold because the calendar does not shift to accommodate weather or alarms. When the line does hold, the payoff is immediate and visible. On 28 July, the first fighters drop their wheels onto a surface that still tastes of salt and lime. On 29 July, B-17 seconds of the 26th Bombardment Squadron roll test and stay. On 30 July, bombs lift for Guadalcanal from a runway that existed only on a whiteboard 3 weeks earlier. Those sorties do more than strike targets. They declare that the base is alive. Fuel can be issued from drums, radios can pass bearings, ground crews can turn aircraft on an unfinished field, and a forward operating rhythm has begun. Every takeoff tells the enemy that harassment has failed to change the date. The comparison in capability is stark because it is cumulative. American procedure stacks advantages: repairable machines, interchangeable crews, measured surfaces, and a chain that runs from quarry to cockpit without drama. Japanese depth is real. Rabal can and will hurt anything careless, but depth does not erase a finished runway once it is compacted, marked, and guarded. Once the first landings succeed, the burden shifts. Defenders must find hit and close a strip that grows stronger with each pass of the roller and each day of operations. The doctrine of a single decisive fleet action, the Kantai Kessen, has little leverage against a tempo built on thousands of small, standardized actions that mature into an airhead. This is why the stakes feel physical. A missed hour is an unrolled section. An unrolled section is a delayed landing. A delayed landing is a thinner fighter screen over the convoy that must appear off Guadalcanal on 7 August. Conversely, each solved problem drainage ditches cut coral layered to spec an AA gun sighted where the tree line breaks becomes protection for the next hour's work. The Seabees are not just beating a deadline, they are converting time into local air power, and every minute they save today removes a mile of danger from tomorrow's route north. By 28 July, the strip is operational. Tires hum across its surface, no longer sinking into the coral, and proof runs no longer waver under braking. On 29 July, the heavy bombers arrive, their engines roaring as they land and settle in. By 30 July, ordnance is moving off the strip and heading towards Guadalcanal. These dates are not just milestones, they mark the culmination of an impossible task that began with a simple order: build a 6,000-foot runway in 20 days. The Seabees' work was relentless. There was no time for celebration. Dust coated their sweat-drenched shirts as they worked around the clock. Wrenches were passed from one machine to the next, ensuring that every piece of equipment stayed running. The goal was clear. Every tire mark, every pass of the roller was a testament to their commitment to the mission. The airstrip wasn't just an engineering feat, it was a lifeline for the Pacific campaign. Every step in the construction process had to be precise. The crown of the runway had to shed water so that it wouldn't pool and make the surface slippery. The shoulders had to remain firm so planes wouldn't dig in under crosswinds. The Seabees kept the dispersal pads wide enough to ensure that a bomb hitting one plane wouldn't take down others. The paint, though crude, was secondary to the surface's functionality. Pilots had to trust the centerline, knowing it would guide them safely through the heavy humidity and heat. But the work wasn't just about technical precision, it was about survival. Every moment counted. The work never stopped for enemy interference. The Japanese bombers and fighters harassed the construction team day and night, trying to interrupt the flow of work. But the Seabees adapted. When an air raid siren went off, the machinery was covered quickly, and the team shut down operations. As soon as the all-clear signal came, the machines roared back to life, and the crew was back to work without hesitation. Each test roll was a step closer to proving the runway could carry the weight of a plane. Trucks unloaded crushed coral in layers, each layer carefully compacted to create a surface that could withstand the pressure of landing gear. The compacting process was painstaking. Steel rollers passed over the surface repeatedly, each pass bringing the surface closer to the required density. The sound of the rollers was the Seabees' constant companion, a reminder that every layer added brought them closer to success. The Japanese forces didn't stop. Their bombers came at first and last light, and their fighters appeared when fuel and distance allowed. The Japanese knew they didn't need to own Espiritu Santo, they just needed to make sure the runway missed its deadline. Every raid, every attempt to disrupt the work, was another attempt to steal precious time. But the Seabees never let up. They worked in darkness under blackout conditions, using covered lamps and tarped engines to keep their presence hidden from enemy aircraft. Even when machines broke down, they kept working. The broken parts were cannibalized and used to keep the other machines running. By 28 July, the strip was long enough for planes to land. Tires hummed as they skidded across the surface, holding firm under the weight of the planes. The fighters came first, landing without hesitation, their tires biting into the coral without issue. Bombers followed, testing the surface with cautious braking, ensuring that the center line was solid. The Seabees had succeeded in their mission against all odds. But they didn't stop there. They kept working. Every new tire mark, every successful landing was a small victory, a signal that they were still on track. The Japanese pressure remained, but it adapted. Their raids became more targeted, more aggressive, but the Seabees had a routine. When the alarm sounded, everything was covered, and the guns went up. When the all-clear came, the covers came off, and the machines roared back to life. Each time a bomb hit, the patch crew moved in, quickly cutting out the damaged section, filling it with fresh coral, and compacting it until the sound of the rollers returned to its familiar high note. 90 minutes was the standard turnaround time, but if the patch team was sharp and the weather held, they could do it even faster. By the end of July, the strip was ready. Fighters had tested it, bombers had landed, and the Seabees had built something that should have been impossible. Every tire mark, every roll of the roller, and every patch of coral was a symbol of their relentless effort. The surface wasn't perfect, but it was functional, and it was ready to support the next phase of the Pacific campaign. The strip was finished enough to fly by the end of July because procedure, discipline, and persistence won out over the enemy's efforts to interrupt. By 30 July, the routine had become tightly organized. Fuel ran from drums on cradle stands, bombs were lifted from timber frames, and radios passed bearings as aircraft staged and prepared for their next mission. A G-4M bomber strayed over the field in the afternoon, its engines humming as it dropped a neat string of bombs across the center of the strip. Ground guns responded swiftly, firing disciplined bursts as the alarm sounded. The covers went on, the machines stopped, and the crew moved into action. The patch crew sprang into action, marking the affected area, cutting out the damaged section and backfilling with fresh coral. They watered the surface, compacted it, and ran the proof truck across it once again. Every movement was swift and calculated, ensuring that the surface was smooth and safe. The chalk marks were refreshed, and within 55 minutes, the strip was ready again. This wasn't just routine, it was the result of meticulous planning and constant preparation, ensuring that each patch of land was usable as soon as possible. The crown of the runway shed water perfectly flowing off the surface as designed, and the shoulders held firm, able to withstand the forces of crosswinds without digging in or softening. The drainage systems worked as intended, running water off into the trees and preventing puddles that could turn into dangerous hazards. The air defense officer walked the perimeter, listening to the low hum of rollers in the distance as they passed over the surface, ensuring every inch was compacted correctly. The lieutenant, clipboard in hand, checked the level one final time as the sun set. He nodded in approval. The strip, though not yet perfect, was functional, and it was holding up under the constant barrage of traffic rain and enemy interference. Every layer laid down, every pass of the roller, every repair made after a bombing run brought the runway one step closer to being ready for the heavy bombers that would soon arrive. North of here, a navigator would once again make his scheduled passes at 0600 and 1700. His logbook would be waiting pencil poised to mark the changes. The line he had drawn weeks ago, marking the start of the strip, had already grown hundreds of feet. Now it was more than just a line. It was a lifeline for the mission. The bomber pilots, the fighters and the ground crews all depended on that line which now stretched across the island, solid and reliable. Each new pass of the navigator's pencil added to the strip's length, confirming the progress that had been made, confirming that this stretch of land could be trusted. On this island, that line was no longer just a technical achievement. It had become the difference between success and failure, between the aircraft being able to take off and defend their comrades, and being stranded without the ability to fight back. For the men who worked tirelessly day and night, that line was proof of their relentless drive and their ability to turn the impossible into reality. By the end of July, the airstrip was no longer an unfinished project. It was a fully functional piece of military infrastructure, a testament to the skill, tenacity, and persistence of the Seabees. Though the surface still had imperfections, it was sturdy enough to handle the incoming bombers and the constant wear and tear of daily operations. Every machine that passed over it, every tire mark that appeared, and every patch that was made showed that this strip would hold. The Japanese could continue their attacks, but they could not stop the work that had already been done. As the air defense officer listened to the rollers continue their work into the evening, he knew the strip was ready. The lieutenant looked around, surveying the strip one last time, knowing that their work was far from over, but the task of building this runway had been a success. They had met the deadline despite the bombings, the weather, and the constant pressure. The line was now real, and it would carry the weight of the war one landing at a time. Doctrine at Espiritu Santo in July 1942 is not a slogan, it is a production line. On 8 July, the site opens under a single order, deliver 6,000 feet in 20 days, safe for fighters as soon as proof runs pass, and firm enough to accept heavies before July closes. The American approach treats an airfield as a product with a minimum operating standard, then increments capability in blocks of 500 to 1,000 feet. Sequence is law: strip the organic mat to mineral. Cut side drains deep enough that a 15-20 minute squall runs off. Hold crown between about 1 and 1.5%, so water leaves the center line. Grade a true longitudinal fall, so wheels and water agree. Spread crushed coral in thin lifts 2 to 3 inches, so compaction works through the layer. Keep moisture just damp before rolling. Proof roll, and accept only when rebound shortens and the surface answers with a higher note, under steel. Logistics run like an inverted conveyor. Coral pit to dump trucks, trucks to graders, and dozers that never wait, rollers looping without dead legs proof crew behind them. Day and night, the aim is simple: no idle blades. When a link fails, the chief mechanic cannibalizes, without ceremony, a tensioner from a dead machine, a pulley filed to fit under a hooded lamp, a hose swapped for anything that holds pressure. The target is not a spreadsheet. It is uptime north of 80% per shift for the lead machines. Security overlays production. Vehicle routes shift by threat window. Lamps wear covers, engines take tarps at alarm, and 2 daily approach windows, first light and late afternoon, govern both gun readiness and where crews dare to show a spark. The governing trade in 8-20 July is flyable before beautiful. Instead of waiting for finished taxiways and permanent revetments, the line chases compaction drainage, and a straight, trustworthy center line over a shorter, usable length then grows in blocks. That choice demands hard acceptance tests. Proof traffic runs center line and shoulders. If a tire prints too deep or rebound lingers, the foreman chalks a square, breaks the glaze, re-waters to optimum, and rolls again until the note climbs. Paint can be crude. Drainage cannot be approximate. Material flow is engineered to prevent starvation. Trucks are staged in depth so the blade never outruns the pile. Lift thickness is policed 2 to 3 inches is doctrine, because thicker lifts only drum and never knit. Thin lifts take energy from rollers and deliver density instead of noise. Moisture is managed by feel and by confines should film not shine. Where night rain softens, the top crews rake and re-roll at first light before any wheel touches the section. Air and ground defense integrate directly with construction. The AA officer cites guns for the arcs that reconnaissance has already used twice, not for map symmetry. Dispersal pads cut into scrub at 1 per day pace ensure a single tight pattern cannot light multiple aircraft. Fuel drums are spread in strings rather than nests, each lashed on cradle stands so hand pumps can pull without tipping. Radio is a crate wall, a mast and a coil, but it passes wind down the strip bearings and clear to land. A man with paddles and a signal panel stands in for a tower that does not exist. Numbers only matter when they decide survival. Crown at 1 to 1.5% keeps the first dawn roll from skating on slurry. Side drains cut another shovel width deeper than comfortable save 12 hours tomorrow when a shower would have made a sinkhole. Lift thickness controls whether a roller's energy becomes density or heat. A 90-minute plug patch cycle mark cut backfill with fresh coral water, compact to the bright note proof, turns a small crater from an all-day problem into a line item. Uptime above 80% for dozers, graders, rollers and haul trucks is not pride. It is the difference between adding 500 feet this week or explaining why good enough rutted under a bomber's brake. Command turns doctrine into calendar. Work is massed into safe hours, midday heat and night under blackout, accepting a lower comfort margin in exchange for fewer alarms. The schedule bakes in pauses 20 minutes after any hard shower for proof checks, longer if the rebound stays springy. If a midfield panel shows a faint shimmy under test, the grader chief orders a corrective feather lift rather than trusting luck. If a G4M walks a neat string across midfield in late July, the patch team is already staged. Saws, shovels, drums and a water can lined behind a running roller. 55 to 90 minutes later, traffic resumes, and the panel's weak base is thickened for the next day. Supply is made resilient by dispersal and substitution. Fuel and ordnance are pre-positioned in multiple threads, so one alarm does not empty a single choke point. Spares are made as often as delivered bushings turned from scrap belts, spliced hoses, sleeved because waiting for the right part costs feet of runway. The maintenance tent keeps a board that matters. Machines, online machines in Cannibal mean time to repair by fault, and the next red hour when Rabaul is likely to look in. That board, not a manual, governs who sleeps. All of this converts distance and time into combat power. A forward strip shortens legs into the Solomons, which raises bomb loads and lowers fuel burn, which lifts the sortie rate and keeps combat air patrol on station longer over the convoy that must appear off Guadalcanal on 7 August. The runway's first acceptable length arrives before perfection because the doctrine says it must. By 28 July, fighters can land, turn and defend. By 29 July, heavy frames can arrive and stay. By 30 July, ordnance can lift north on a schedule. Those dates validate the method continuous output beats episodic interruption. The Japanese can still reach from Rabaul, but a finished panel is a kind of fact that harassment cannot easily erase. Close the loop, the line holds because decisions are framed in physics. Water leaves the crown. Loads sit on density, not hope. Threat windows shape work, not the other way around. And every block added between 8 July and 7 August is more than footage. It is a moving shield that lets ships and men cross water under a sky that is increasingly theirs. Tempo becomes armor. The steadier the hands, the harder it is to hit. It breaks not with a speech, but with a schedule. On 8 July 1942, the order is fixed, 6,000 feet in 20 days, and every attempt to slow it becomes a calculation against that date. First, light alarms still come. Late afternoon, look-ins still circle, but the line learns to breathe around them. Lamps wear covers, engines take tarps. Guns stand ready on arcs that reconnaissance has already used twice. The work stops for minutes, not hours, and then restarts at the same tempo, blades down and rollers humming toward the same number. The myth to be broken says, a forward runway in the tropics cannot be built and kept on time under reach and harass pressure from Rabaul. It dies because continuous output outlasts episodic force. The physics are plain. Crown is held at roughly 1 to 1.5%, so water runs off the center line. Side drains cut a shovel width deeper than comfort, so a 15-minute squall leaves no sinkhole. Lifts stay thin 2 to 3 inches, so roller energy turns into density, not noise. Proof runs police the truth. If rebound lingers, a panel is cut, watered to optimum damp, and compacted until the steel sings a higher note. Those are not tidy phrases. They are survival steps that turn hours into footage. Between 8 and 20 July, the governing trade is flyable before beautiful. The crew accepts a shorter, usable length with full compaction, and drainage then grows in blocks of 500 to 1,000 feet. Taxiways wait. Permanent revetments wait. The measurable targets do not. Uptime for the dozers, graders, rollers, and haul trucks must live above 80% per shift, or the blade outruns the pile. When a machine fails, the chief mechanic cannibalizes a dead one for a tensioner, sleeves a leaking hose, files a pulley under a hooded lamp, and the line keeps moving. The maintenance board that matters counts machines online, not parts on requisition. Harassment arrives on schedule too. A flying boat plots 0, 6, 0, 0 and 1,000, 700 arcs and hunts white scars at the tree line. AG4M walks a light stick over the north edge and lopes home. Range trims his load, weather steals aim, but near misses still bruise morale and steal a shift if allowed. They are not allowed. The patch team carries a repeatable answer mark cut backfill with fresh coral water compact to the bright note proof. In July, the cycle lives at 55 to 90 minutes. The cost is a coffee gone cold and 1 lift of extra material. The gain is a date that does not move. By 20 July, the drains have proved themselves in a short, hard 2,330 shower water runs along the shoulders and disappears into the trees. The next morning shows no soft bellies under a test axle. That gives permission for the schedule to tilt forward. Panel by panel, the centerline becomes a promise that pilots can trust. Dispersal pads open at 1 per day, so a tight pattern cannot light multiple airframes. Fuel and ordnance are spread in threads rather than nests. Hand pumps on cradle stands turn drums without toppling them. A crate and mast radio passes bearings and wind down the strip, while a man with paddles and a panel stands in for a tower that does not exist. The shift is visible from the enemy cockpit. On 25 July, an A6M leader rides shotgun on a reconnaissance leg and reports a ribbon that is longer than last pass with coral berms, where none were before. He cannot plot why the line keeps growing. He can only mark that it does. His report is accurate and strategically useless because once a panel reaches density and drainage, it becomes a fact, not a plan. Facts are hard to bomb out of existence. Milestones track the collapse of the myth. On 28 July, a fighter drops wheels onto coral that still smells of lime and salt. The tires sing a thin note mid-field. The brakes hold true. Ground crew waves the pilot through. The grader chief orders a feather lift over the panel where a faint shimmy spoke. On 29 July, a heavy frame arrives and stays. Main gear prints are shallow and symmetrical, and proof is accepted. On 30 July, ordnance lifts north for Guadalcanal from a centerline that was a tree line 3 weeks earlier. Each date converts theory into tempo. Each landing lengthens the day's ambitions, another 100 feet of strip, another dispersal bay, another drain cut before the night rain. Opposition adapts, but adaptation cannot outpace continuity. A lazy midnight string becomes a neat daytime stick aimed midfield. The answer is the same routine at higher resolution. Covers on, covers off. Patch team staged with saws, shovels, drums, water and a running roller. A proof truck down the seam, a bright note under steel chalk refreshed. Meanwhile, the AA officer slides a gun 10 yards to put fire into the dusk lane he has seen twice. Minutes lost return as feet gained before breakfast. The arithmetic turns. Total freeze time per day drops below the footage added. The harassment remains noisy and increasingly unprofitable. Cause and effect seal the argument. Physics on the surface creates safe landings. Safe landings create a reliable turnaround chock fuel. From drums sling, from timber magneto check taxi depart. A turnaround becomes sorties. Sorties become pressure in the opposite direction, combat air patrol on station, longer reconnaissance that shows early strikes that force Rabaul's crews to fly on the Americans' clock. Tempo becomes armor. The steadier the hands, the narrower the enemy's windows, and the higher the cost of each attempt to pry them open. The runway's date binds the campaign's date. It is not a flourish that fighters are accepted on 28 July, heavies on 29, and the first bombs lift on 30. Those are the teeth that bite into the week before 7 August. When the convoy turns north, it does so with a forward strip behind it that can receive at dawn, turn in heat, and send help south or north as required. The harassment theory does not vanish. It simply runs out of leverage against a surface that now holds and a rhythm that now repeats. By the morning of 7 August, the field's geometry is routine. Crown sheds, drains, bite shoulders carry, and dispersal pads hold silhouettes apart. Guns sit where the arcs demand. The radio passes bearings without drama. The maintenance board still counts uptime. None of it looks heroic. All of it is decisive at the scale that matters. The date held. Their bombs didn't. By the end of July 1942, the airstrip at Espiritu Santo had become more than just a technical achievement. It was a lifeline that would carry the momentum of the Pacific campaign forward. The strip had gone from a jungle clearing to a fully operational airfield in less than 3 weeks. On 28 July, when the first fighter touched down, it marked a shift in the balance of power. By 29 July, heavier aircraft like the B-17 bombers were landing and remaining on the strip without issue. By 30 July, ordnance was already being dispatched north to Guadalcanal from a field that had barely existed just days before. The dates were not arbitrary. They tracked the success of a mission that only weeks before had seemed impossible. The target was clear: build a 6,000-foot runway in 20 days. That goal had been met, and the result was nothing short of remarkable. The strip was functional, but it was also symbolic of the speed, precision, and determination that defined American operations in the Pacific. Between 31 July and 6 August, the pace of operations quickened. Aircraft cycled in and out, refueled, rearmed, and returned to the skies. Dispersal pads were added 1 per day to ensure that a single strike wouldn't take down multiple planes. Ground crews worked tirelessly, ensuring the airstrip stayed in top condition, repairing it between flights. Maintenance was done on the fly. If a machine broke down, it didn't mean the end. It meant improvisation, adapting on the spot, and keeping things moving. Despite the persistent efforts of the Japanese to disrupt operations, the American rhythm continued uninterrupted. Bombing runs came and went, but the airstrip's construction didn't stop. The Japanese knew they couldn't halt the Americans, they could only delay them. But delay was no longer enough. The Seabees had proven their ability to build, repair, and defend, and they did it with a sense of urgency and efficiency that left little room for failure. By 7 August, the American operational tempo had become predictable. Fighter aircraft were ready for defensive operations, reconnaissance flights were already in motion, and bombers were preparing for their missions. The airstrip, once a rough clearing, was now a critical asset that had transformed the battlefront. And yet the key achievement was not just in the construction of the airstrip. It was in the realization that the American response to the demands of the war had shifted. No longer were they waiting for the enemy's next move. Now they were dictating the pace of operations. The enemy had to adjust to the rhythm the Americans had set. The strip at Espiritu Santo had become a symbol of this new American initiative. It wasn't just a 6,000-foot stretch of coral. It was a declaration that the United States could move swiftly, adapt quickly, and forcefully dictate the terms of battle. The success of the airfield at Espiritu Santo would be replicated across the Pacific as more airstrips were built to support the ever-expanding reach of American forces. The principles of rapid construction, adaptability, and operational efficiency became the foundation of the island-hopping strategy. And in the final analysis, as the Seabees worked tirelessly to prepare the field for continued operations, the mission was clear. They had set out to build 6,000 feet of runway in 20 days, and they had done it. The date held. 6,000 feet held. Their bombs didn't.